Well, I was asked, what is courage in the 21st century? And actually, I had never thought about it. What is courage in the 21st century? My parents-in-law were born, and we're not born in Holland, but they lived through the war in Holland. And I am sure they could describe courage just like this, while remembering what the war was like in Holland in 1939 to 45. But for us, the generation that has been born and has been blessed to live in a peaceful era, courage is a little bit more difficult to define. So I gave it some thought, and I came up with this conviction that courage is the opposite of cowardice. It's just that. It's the opposite of cowardice. Everybody knows when we say you're a coward, it's not a compliment. But when we say generous, when we say courageous, it's like, what is that? So courage, actually, it's what keeps fear from taking a hold of our actions. Our actions cannot be dictated by fear, otherwise we're cowards. It's what keeps us from running on our fears and on our insecurities. It's what keeps us from being focused on the positive, and we look at the negative. I was trained to serve in the diplomatic service of Canada, and actually I never got there. I mean, I never served overseas. I was trained in Canada for 2 years, but I met my husband, who was my co-worker, and after 2 years of training, he was posted to Lima, Peru. So I took a leave of absence to follow spouse, and I got married in Lima, Peru, and my non-diplomatic career started with my husband, who was the professional diplomat. Our life, my leave of absence without pay extended to 11 years overseas. And during those 11 years, we moved from Peru to Guatemala, to Beijing, and back to Brazil. And we had 3 children. And we were just a normal family, but living in extraordinary circumstances. Life in South America presented challenges that we would never have encountered in Canada, ever. Life is pretty calm in Canada, and in South America it was pretty rocky at times. In the late 80s, when we lived in Guatemala, Guatemala was governed by a military dictatorship and was transitioning to a democratic system. But that era was very violent. It was like living in the Wild West. Our neighbors actually were flying in and out of their properties in helicopter to prevent themselves from being kidnapped. The neighbors on the other side were traveling in convoys of armored cars with gunmen inside the cars to prevent them from being kidnapped. On our street, a military general traveling with his grandchildren was gunned down in front of our house. On the empty lots, every so often, there were gunned down bodies that were being found on the Monday morning after the weekend. People were saying in our neighborhood, if they could only build a house so we could stop finding dead bodies on the vacant lots. One day, one of our diplomats was pursued by a truckload of people, gunmen, who shot at him, and he came to our house bleeding. We thought he was going to fall on the floor dead, but it's because all the windows of his car were shot, and the glass all shattered in his face, and only his hand on the steering wheel had been shot. Otherwise, he was in shock. We were in shock, but his life was spared. But he came to our house, and our house in those days was like a fortress of steel doors and gates and buzzers and things like that. It was living really under being hostage in our own house. On a more personal basis, we had the armed guards in our house, and one of my armed guards was kidnapped. The ambassador called me and asked me to go to a safe house because I had lost my guard. I didn't know he had been kidnapped. He was outside. And I had to live in a safe house while my husband was in another country. Eventually, even myself, I had friends, and our friends, Lucy, my friend from the British Embassy, her children were in the back seat of her car when her car was hijacked at gunpoint. One day I went to the dentist, my dentist, and I drove into the underground parking lot only to have a huge submachine gun shoved through the window of my car. I thought I was a goner. And all he said is, "You're not allowed to park here." It was absolutely... My guard was in the back seat with his little revolver, about 1/10 the size of this submachine gun. And the two of us, we were shaking in our boots, and we had no time to react. And we said, "We promise we'll never park here again." But basically, they were guarding the building so that the tenants would not be kidnapped. It was like the Wild West. At a stop sign, at a stop light, my car window was open, and this arm reached out to me, grabbed my neck, and then stole my gold necklace, but left my neck bruised for days and me shaken to the core. Those were the days where I had just given birth to one son, and I was pregnant with the other one. It was difficult to have a steady family life in that environment. In 1987, our government asked us to move to Beijing. In Beijing, in those days, the government controlled our lives. We were assigned the personnel, our household staff. We were assigned our apartment. We were assigned people who worked with us. We were assigned everything. We were assigned not to leave Beijing at all. We were assigned, I was assigned a teacher, a Chinese teacher, and we know how difficult it is to learn Chinese in the best of circumstances. But I had, by then, my third son was born in China, and I had 3 little children, and actually my teacher, my government-appointed teacher, was more interested and taken by my 3 young sons than she was by the fact that she was going to teach me Chinese. In fact, when she did teach me Chinese, she felt compelled to teach me about Chinese institutions like the trains and the post office. When we were not allowed to leave China, Beijing, so the trains were useless, and we were using the diplomatic pouch as a courier system to Canada, so we were not using the post office. It was a strain. The strain on us in Beijing was actually physical, cultural, and emotional isolation. We lived in China before computers and before cell phone. So there was no way I could contact my husband when he traveled all over China. I could contact my family by phone, but it was very expensive in those days. And basically, because of my lack of Chinese, I couldn't discuss much with anybody. Then my third son was born, so I was otherwise very busy. But I kept following what my husband did, because both of us are in the trade sector. We're both trade commissioner, and it was very interesting what he was doing. But when he left for the office, it was kind of lonely to be in Beijing by myself. What compensated that was the fact that our staff, the people on our staff, were so nice. The Chinese people were so nice. We were so touched. They made up for all the loss. We would not have gone back to Canada if our life depended on it, because there was such warmth. At first, when they started working with us, they did not know each other. So they were very guarded towards each other. They did not chat with each other very easily. There was no joyful banter. There was no relaxation. It was very guarded. But over time, our staff learned to interact with each other and to talk with each other and to appreciate each other. They sang with the children. They taught me songs. They were just so patient with me and with the children, who learned Chinese much faster than I did. So there was something being awakened in us, a love for China that was being awakened right into our private home. And then we lived through June 4th, 1989. And that was a real challenging moment. But it was a defining moment for us. After June 4th, we had to leave China temporarily, but we felt something had been born in us, something had been implanted in us. We kind of felt, it's always kind of fluid what you're feeling at the moment, but it becomes more concrete later on. But my husband and I, both of us felt, we want to come back here. There's going to be a rekindling of the hope. There's going to be a rebirth of this society, and we want to be part of it, and we want to be part of it for the long term. But we left China in 1990 after our government asked us to move to Brazil. In Brazil, we had the understanding, we thought we had the understanding with our government that after Brazil we could go back to China. But by then we had spent many years in Latin America. We spoke fluent Portuguese and Spanish. And in 95, we asked to please go back to China, but our government said no. By then they offered us to go to Mexico. So that would have been like 12 or 15 years in South America. Not that we don't like Mexico, it's beautiful, but our heart was out for China. So here we were kind of being faced with very difficult decision. We had 3 children in private school. We had a flourishing diplomatic career. We had a comfortable life. We had our friends, our network, everything. But we had that tug at our heart that we should go back to China. That was 1995, much before the tsunami of people who moved to China. So when we talked about that with our friends, everybody said, "Are you crazy? Like, why would you want to go there?" They didn't realize how much we had enjoyed and appreciated the hospitality of the people of China. So there was a lot of soul searching between my husband and I. We considered the future of the children. We considered where our career was going to go, like down. But there was something being awakened in us. I would say courage was being awakened in us. Fortunately, my husband received a God-sent phone call, offering him a position as a CEO in Toronto in the private sector. We thought we only knew the Foreign Service, the Trade Commissioner Service, but here was an opportunity, and we thought, but what's going to be the effect on our children? That we should leave the diplomatic service, living overseas. That's the life they know. In fact, my son thought that people in Canada looked pretty weird by comparison to China. That's how integrated they were. And so we did a lot of soul searching, but we decided that we were going to leave the diplomatic service and move to China. So at first, he worked out of Toronto, and quickly he was offered to move to China and settle here. But again, the timing was wrong. We still had one son in high school, and I couldn't come. So we talked about it. We searched our heart. We searched our inward resources, and we decided that he was moving to China and I was staying in Canada for 3 years. We did that, and eventually I moved here in 2006, and our son went to Jiaotong University. But before I left for China, I went to hear a lady who had been working with children in India And her story was very compelling. So here's what she told us. When she was first married, her husband was offered to go to India for 1 year to replace a colleague. I think it was in the medical field. So he did that, and she was very reluctant, but agreed to go. They stayed, they extended their stay until, unfortunately and unexpectedly, her husband died of a heart attack. All the work that he had done with hospitals and orphanages in India kind of reverted to her by default. When she gave that speech in Toronto in 2005, that lady was 75 years old, and she had been in India for 55 years. I was by myself listening to this speech. My husband was living in China, and I thought, silently, I was hoping that something like that could happen for me in China. So in 2006, I decided to move back to China. I was in China, and I started doing volunteer work. And then we reached migrant children here in Shanghai, and then that's all we could do as volunteers. So in 2011, at the age of 60, I registered a company. I registered a consulting company, created CSR programs, proceeded to reach out to the multinationals, found out where the children were located in the furthest provinces of China, and now we connect the corporation, multinational or national corporation, we connect the corporation with the children in the very far provinces, very distant provinces, and very poor provinces of China through CSR program. First, we offer them a gift bag full of clothes and shoes. The children in the interior, they have Crocs, but they don't have shoes with laces, so they can't run. They don't have manufactured toys. They play with sticks and stones. So we send them that, and we send them books, individual bags full of books in the summer. And the multinational corporation and the national corporations help us do that. Second, we identified maybe 500 children that we want to put on child sponsorship to give them a fighting chance to go all the way to high school. We're not talking university level here. We're talking basic education until high school. And lastly, we also come alongside of the foster homes, and we see which one needs to have repair, renovation, upgrades, and we match them with the multinational corporation that can take them on as their CSR program. So bottom line, my life is the sum total of many decisions that have led us from the Canadian Foreign Service to service in China. We don't regret making those decisions. Every little decision required a small amount of courage. But on the whole, it has shaped our life, it has shaped the life of our children, and we truly don't regret it. We were an ordinary family, but we chose to live an extraordinary life. Thank you.